We have the privilege of having the Olathe Advanced Technical Center folks with us today. These are students. They're celebrating their 10-year anniversary with students involving career and technical education, preparing them for the workforce, secondary education, and the military. So if I would like that group to stand up and be recognized, and welcome to the People's House.
Thank you for being here today, and welcome to Senate Education. Next, we're going to have Jennifer Light just kind of shed some light, no pun intended, on how this process works for those of you who are new, how the recommendation process works. So, Jennifer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. After we finish recommendations in here today, what will happen is Amanda and I will go downstairs and work on the Budget Committee report. The Budget Committee reports will have what the Senate committee's positions were as far as what was accepted from the House side and what was changed, deleted, added, any language differences. That will be sent to the committee for review. So please be looking for that in your emails. We're going to request that you look at those and have responses to us by Friday so that we are able to do the report out in Senate Ways and Means next week. If you have issues or concerns about anything that is in the Budget Committee report, please respond to the analyst that has the agency. That'll all be in the email as well, because I know some of this information is always helpful to be in multiple places. But we just wanted to make sure you were keeping an eye out for those Budget Committee reports to make sure that you concur with them. If you concur with the Budget Committee report, you do not need to respond to the email, but if you do have concerns, please do reach out so we can make sure that everything is correct. If there is a concern brought to us, we will reach out to the chair to make sure we understand it correctly and get clarification. So, and then we'll go to do the report out to Senate Ways and Means next week, where the chair will do the report out to that full committee.
Thank you. Any questions about going forward and what you need to do when you get the report? Okay, thank you for that, Jennifer. Okay, committee, today we are going to work on the budgets that we have heard the last couple of days in order to make those recommendations to Senate Ways and Means. We are going to begin with the School for the Blind, and how we will do this is just like we do when we make a motion to move a bill out or anything. So if you have a recommendation, you just need to say, I recommend that we, whatever your recommendation is, there'll be a second, we'll discuss, and then take a voice vote on that. And then if it passes, we'll make it a recommendation from this committee, and if not, we won't. Any questions on the process? Great. Recommendations on the School for the Blind. Are we going to accept the position that we have from the House? Senator Petty.
So, Madam Chair, I do have an amendment that we have copies for.
Senator, would you like to explain or have the reviser?
I'll let Tamara.
Thank you, and just for the committee's awareness, budget speak is not my normal thing, so bear with me. So I believe that the School for the Blind had an appropriation that they weren't able to spend in fiscal year 25, and this would add that $41,000 back to the School for the Blind, and then would allow for the reappropriation of monies moving forward.
Questions on the amendment? Or Senator Petty, would you like to add?
No, I think that was very clear.
Okay, any questions on the amendment? And so that is your recommendation to accept this, Senator?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Sykes. Discussion on this amendment. Senator Starnes.
Just for clarity, the $41,000 is to pay for the extended school year. Is that correct?
Tamara?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, all of those in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. That will be a committee recommendation. Thank you. Are there any others on the budget for the School for the Blind? Seeing none, we will move to the School for the Deaf. Are there any recommendations on the budget for the School for the Deaf? Senator Gossage?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move we approve the recommendation that was given to us in committee.
Okay, is there a second? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting the budget, say aye. Opposed, no. That will be our recommendation then, to accept as presented. We will now move to KSDE's budget. And I will make a recommendation that we continue to fully fund our schools, including the CPIU, per Gannon. That's my recommendation. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Blasey. Discussion on the recommendation. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So does your recommendation then follow the budget sheet as we're looking at it?
Senator, I've got my Ways and Means notebook, so I'm.
Okay, I'm actually, I think it's justice in the Ways and Means notebook. It would be page 79, I believe. Is that the correct page?
Okay, I'm looking at Jennifer, but I believe that is correct. Jennifer, help me. If those are all per Gannon. I know the Children's Initiative Fund is not, but the amount looks correct.
So, Madam Chair, the amounts that are listed underneath the Legislative Budget Committee is House Bill 2007 as introduced, which means it has none of the enhancements. And there also are a couple of things that are not included, including the salaries and wages on page 81 that was included by the House and put back in. So that is how it stood at the end of the interim committee on legislative budget, is what those numbers are for fiscal year 25 and 26.
So Jennifer, that includes all of Gannon that we are required to fund per Gannon. Is that correct?
It includes all of the numbers from the consensus revenue estimates for the most recent version of the consensus revenue estimates, yes.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Senator Thomas.
Madam Chair, thank you. If we adopt this, we can still make additional requests after this motion, correct?
That is correct. Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So can you clarify, or Jennifer or Tamara, exactly which figure that you're looking at and the amount?
Jennifer?
So, Madam Chair, the numbers I was referring to are the ones that are listed on page 79 on the figure 1, where it says Legislative Budget Committee fiscal year 2025. So at the end, the final total for that is 6.6 billion. I'm not, but that number there. And then 2 columns over where it says Legislative Budget Committee fiscal year 2026 with a $6.7 billion on that line. The total line that's in yellow at the bottom of the expenditures, it's the same number for both total lines because one of them shows the expenditures and one shows financing. But when I was answering the question, that was the number I was referring to.
So a follow-up on that. So when I look at that, you're including the financing with the Children's Initiative Fund in that as well?
Yes, Madam Chair. Based on what the chair said, where she was including the Children's Cabinet, it would include the Children's Initiative funds as well. That was my understanding of what the request was to include the Children's Cabinet and then fund Gannon.
No, let me be clear. My recommendation is we fund Gannon, period. That includes CPIU, nothing more, nothing less.
So, Madam Chair, you're looking for the number without the Children's Cabinet fund figures in it?
I think that's what the committee is wanting to know.
I'm going to need a few minutes for that one.
We will get you that number. In the meantime, any other questions, comments? Senator Petty.
And I'm glad that Jennifer's looking, I think probably the problem is that as we've been working this K-12 budget, we really haven't been referring to Gannon. And so that's why I asked the question, because it makes it a little unclear when we're looking specifically at the budget and the agency's overview. We haven't been referring in any way to any legal decisions as we've had this discussion. And now, Madam Chair, you're bringing that up specifically, which just, I think, adds a little bit of confusion there.
So the reason why, when we look at the budget, we don't refer to Gannon is because this is a reflection of the requirement per Gannon. And so Gannon is the standard by which we fully fund our schools. And that is what I am recommending, fully funding our schools, continuing to per Gannon, including the CPIU. And we can get that specific number if that's helpful to the committee. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so just for clarification, the CPI has been what additional funds would this be? Or is this in already the other figures that we're given as far as recommendations?
Great question. I can tell you what the CPIU is. For fiscal year 2025, CPIU is $228 million additional funds. Over the last 2 years, it's been a total of $471 million for the CPIU. So that's additional funds going to schools per Gannon to fully fund. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to make sure I'm clear in your motion. So could you tell me, we've asked, I guess, a few questions about what it is, but what in the budget summary would not then be included in your motion?
Okay, the budget summary is a little bit difficult. Does the committee have a chart called State Aid and Other Assistance? Do you have the access? I don't know if that was provided to. Page 95, did you say 95? That will make it easier because I can tell you what is Gannon on that chart. Okay. And Jennifer, check me. Make sure. Okay, so what would be considered in this motion would be state foundation aid, supplemental state aid, special education state aid, capital outlay state aid, capital improvement state aid, and the CAPERS, USD and non-USD. Going on down, then we have the 20 mil local property tax, the 20 mil transfer from SGF, the school district finance fund, the mineral production fund, and the CAPERS ELARF. That's what's included in my recommendation. Any other, does that help? I hope. Question, Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That does help. Now, so then moving across, looking on page 95, so then would we be looking at the agency request column then?
Looking at it for what purpose?
Your motion said according to Gannon, and so the first column is actual expenditures in 2024, and then the agency request is the next column in 2025. Then we have the LBC recommendation, which would have been the interim committee that met in December. And then we have the agency request. So I'm not sure and then we have the LBC recommendations also for 26, which have been for the interim, I think. Would that be correct, staff? Is that coming from the interim?
Jennifer.
So, Madam Chair, the agency request was done before the fall consensus. So the agency request does not include the fall consensus numbers. The LBC recommendations for both 25 and 26 do include the fall consensus numbers. So I believe if we're discussing and you want to include the consensus numbers, you'd need to look at the LBC recommendations in order to have the most recent education consensus numbers fully factored into your dollar amounts.
Thank you, Jennifer. Senator Petty.
So then as a follow-up from that, so then the LBC recommendations on 25 and 26 do include the fall consensus numbers. But now now what I'm not clear on with those recommendations was anything taken out before those recommendations were made? Or is it just, would it be based on, the difference there would be that they were using the fall consensus numbers?
Jennifer.
So, Madam Chair, in the state aid section, as we're looking at the state aid table, the only thing that was removed by the interim committee in those specific areas was the reappropriations of $23,000 for special education state aid that the House put back in. So that is the only, and that's the reappropriations into 25 that is not listed in the LBC recommendations in those specific numbers on the chart. The other stuff is either enhancement requests that were removed. So the agency's enhancement request for the additional money for special education is not in there because that was an enhancement request. The $10 million for the special education state aid is not in there because that was done by the House. And I believe all the rest of them are not within those specific funds. So the only dollar amount that would be missing from these specific funds would be the 23,000 that was the reappropriations for 25 in special education state aid. It's a little more than 23,000. It's 23,875. And then the House's position of 10 million additional funding for special education state aid in 26, which then moves on and is maintenance of effort in 27 as well. And so those are the only ones in these specific funds on this table that are different from the LBC rec to what the House decided. I think that answered the question.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Argabright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question would be, did the LBC follow the Gannon? And how would we know that? As far as numbers, I guess I'm not sure if we're looking at the correct numbers. How do we know that?
Well, we can verify that. I mean, but for me, the bottom line is we will make sure in Ways and Means that whatever amount fully funds our schools is what will be appropriated, including the CPIU. And those numbers may vary, but the bottom line is we will fully fund our schools, as we have been for the last several years, per Gannon through 2026. That's my recommendation. Senator Shane.
Madam Chair's point of clarification, as part of the settlement again and finishing that out, wasn't that kind of where the numbers for state-based aid came from, and the agency helps make those estimates? So as long as we're sticking kind of to what the state foundation aid estimates are plus CPIU, we should be in compliance and there shouldn't be any concern.
I believe that is the case because that is built in, those increases are built into the base. Now, I just want to caution that outside of that, as Jennifer said, with estimates and so forth, but what I want this committee to focus on is whatever that amount is to fully fund our schools per Gannon, that's the recommendation. Okay? And Ways and Means will make sure that that is the amount that goes to fully fund our schools. Okay? Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Other comments or questions from the committee? Senator Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to make one recommendation, if I may. Originally, there was a request for $500,000 for the College Board Advanced Placement exams. I believe that was pulled out of the House. There was a dollar amount settled on at $335,000 to include $45,000 for the exams, $184,000 for the seminar exams, and $106,000 for all exams, especially for the low-income students. Any cost to the teachers or the stipends or all of that, I believe would go to the districts. So that was a compromise. So I would make a recommendation that we add $335,000 for fiscal year 2026 for the College Board Advanced Placement exams.
Okay, we have a recommendation. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Sykes. Discussion. Senator Sykes.
So just to clarify, even after I seconded it, this is for the English, the AP, CSP, and pre-calculus, those specific?
That's correct, yes.
I seconded this, but I do support it. I think this is a good investment. I know my own children did not do concurrent enrollment. They did AP testing, and I had one of my sons who just graduated from school a semester early because of advanced placement, and where I had the ability to spend over $600 on those AP tests. That's not the case for everyone, so I thank the senator for bringing this amendment.
Any other questions or comments? I will be opposing this, and I will state my reason why. I think that this is a great thing My kids benefited from AP exams. And I'm not saying this because I don't support the worthiness of this program. I do. But we are fully funding our schools. They received an additional $228 million in CPIU. And this committee is told all the time, local control. And so I think we are fully funding schools. They're getting an additional $228 million. If this is a value to each local district, then they have the funds to do so. So it's not a statement on whether I think AP is worthy or not, but we are fully funding schools, giving them an additional $228 million, so I will be opposing this. Any other comments? Seeing none. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. Motion fails. Any other recommendations? Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make a motion regarding the KSDF fiscal year 26 budget. I make a motion to remove the proviso language relating to the Youth Career Development Pilot Program from under the agency's operating expenses accounts and instead include language that require and authorize such expenditures to be made from any monies appropriated to the agency from the state general fund or any special revenue fund. And this regards youth programs specifically such as YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, 4-H, other youth organizations with the ability to have virtual opportunities in learning.
Okay, we have a recommendation. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Archerbright. Discussion on the recommendation. Senator Shane.
Madam Chair, could I request that Senator Starnes restate that and then maybe provide rationale and whatnot behind the motion? Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. That's okay. We just want to make sure we understand the recommendation put before us. And Senator, with your permission, I'd like to ask the revisor maybe to go through this. That might be helpful. Tamara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding is that currently this proviso is placed under the department's operating expenditures, and this would just move the proviso under a different account so that they could make those expenditures from any money appropriated to the agency instead of from that particular account.
Senator Starnes.
Yes, and that, thank you, Tamara. And with that, thank you, Madam Chair, is also it creates more flexibility for them to be able to utilize those funds in the department.
So is this creating any new funding, any new expenditure, or it's just moving it to another fund for more flexibility? I just want to make sure I understand.
That is my understanding, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this recommendation? Senator Gossage.
Yes, I would just like to know, what are those funds being used for now?
Senator Starnes?
I'm not sure.
We'll ask staff. Jennifer?
So, Madam Chair, the House included this language in their the version that came out of House Appropriations. So what it is for, it'd be used for the same thing no matter where it's been put, but at the time in the proviso that was coming from House Appropriations, it was to go within any existing funds. There was discussion about where exactly that needed to fall. So I think this is, and at that point, it went under the operating expenditures. If you remember, the agency discussed this as one of their requests for a technical change, that they were requesting it not be under the operating expenditures because it is for aid going out to other people, and that does not usually come from the operating expenditures fund. So that is why the agency mentioned it in their request to this committee to move it from underneath the operating expenditures fund, that it can be from any SGF fund as opposed to just specifically within operating expenditures. But it is not something that was being funded prior to this year, I do not believe.
Thank you. Other questions? Senator Gossage?
So then it is new funding?
Jennifer?
It is within existing resources, so it is not new money going in. It was just directing that a specific dollar amount of the money that they already have budgeted would go to that. And the agency's request was that it not be from operating expenditures, because operating expenditures and state aid, when you start pulling from the two different things, it starts to make accounting a little murky. So but it is within existing resources that they have dollars already for. It is not new money on top of the funding that is there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions or comments? Senator Petty?
So, Madam Chair, if it's okay if I direct this to Jennifer?
Certainly.
Thank you. So this is not new funds, it's just putting it in a different location, so it's more usable. I guess it's state general, or any special revenue funds. It is specific for this virtual reality technology and in grades 6 through 8. And does that mean that it's if it's done, that it's a 1-to-2 match?
So, Madam Chair, in reading this, yes, it is for a pilot program that would use the virtual reality technology for grades 6 through 8. And it's a basis of $1 of non-state funds or private monies for $2 of state monies. So for every $2 of the state money that goes in, there'd have to be $1 either from non-state or private funds that are also being contributed.
Committee, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a recommendation and a second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Recommendation will be made. Other recommendations from the committee? Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm on a roll. So the next thing, on page 84, the 24-26 budget summary, if you'd look there, it has a budget for SPED, a 3-year plan. And I would like to make a recommendation that that 80.9% is the figure that we go with. And the additional cost, the fiscal note on that, I need to look for just a second, I'm sorry. If I just look at the chart myself, 87 million. And yeah, additional cost, 87,574,215.
We have a recommendation. Do we have a second? Seconded by Senator Argabright.
Appropriate, I'm sorry.
This is the time for comments.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I would second that. I think a 3-year ramp up is appropriate because you can see the cost to get to 92%. what makes special ed complicated and complicated to understand, and I'm going to be very brief, but there's a local effort, there's a state effort, and there's a federal effort. And all three play a part in special ed funding. The feds don't always pay what they're supposed to pay, and that's been the reality for a long time. And so the state trying to hit a threshold of 92% has been a goal for quite some time, and we haven't hit it very often. So what does that look like? What makes it complicated is these are our most challenged kids for different reasons, whether it's behavior, whether it's physical, cognitive, a whole array of things that an IEP might be written on. And so every one of those kiddos, regardless of geographic location, costs a different amount. And so it's hard to pin down when you talk to constituents what does special ed actually cost, because every kid's a little bit different. Even at 92%, your local district is going to kick in a pretty significant amount for special ed, even when we hit that. And that's coming from their, generally speaking, either their general fund or their supplemental general fund, and they're transferring those dollars. So I definitely think this is a move in the right direction. It helps our most needy kids in all kinds of categories, our most sensitive kids that cost a lot of money at times. But to move them, I think this is beneficial. I would second that.
Other comments or questions? Senator Starnes.
I think one thing to point out as well with special education, the opportunity is not only public but also private school students as well, taking advantage of that opportunity. And so I think the bottom line, we're helping all kids be successful.
Other questions or comments? Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to support this. Last school year, our school district spent $439 million to backfill the shortfall. While this is not going to get us up there, it is a step forward. I know my legislative district, I represent Shawnee Mission School District and Olathe School District, and they have spent almost $67 million. That's coming out of our regular classroom for SPED, so I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is, of course, an incredibly complicated topic, but I was looking at the Assistant Secretary's testimony, and in here is a table for special education state aid. So am I correct in understanding that in 2024, we estimated that the state expended or provided $528 million in special education state aid, and in 25 we are budgeting to increase that to $601 million. Is that correct? So almost a 14% increase.
That is correct.
That the state's providing. I guess I think we're in a bit of a vicious cycle with a highly complex issue, and as I look at this, since 2010 we've increased from $367 million to now $600 million. And our percent of excess costs continues to deteriorate, although our spending continues to go up. And so we have these kind of competing themes. So it's not to say that the state has not been providing or not been increasing. It looks like we're talking about at least a 13.8, 14% increase. And I think we need to be cautious about continuing to make additional increases. I'd be a little bit concerned about moving up to the threshold proposed by Senator Starnes. It's not a sustainable path. I think we need to be very intentional about what we're doing on special education to make sure we're going about things the right way. 14% increase that's a big increase, and it certainly is in excess of CPIU.
Senator Starnes.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comments, Senator, and you're exactly right. It is something, and the thing that we just talked about, the Gannon decision, and believing that we should follow the law. The law said 92%. We're not there, and so we need to make every effort to do what we can to get to that. And I understand your concerns. 14% is a big jump, and concur with that as well. But making sure that we're following through with what the law is and we ensure that our kids are taken care of.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're estimating what we need to cover. We're trying to make some sort of estimate based off of what we think the federal government will provide. Is that correct? So we're always kind of making a shot in the dark. Would that be an accurate way to say that?
Correct. The way the federal government reads is it's the goal of providing a certain percent, whereas we put in our statute 92% of excess costs. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Again, looking at that chart, just the recommendation, because we used ARPA funds last year, we would be going down that $2.5 million. And this is not discretionary funds. This is what we are obligated to do. I have a report here from Aligned where it's talking about the funding for special education. And again, the national average is 15% of all public schools, but Kansas is higher than the national average, and we're at 17%. So again, we are required to use these dollars. It is just going out of our regular classroom. And even with the CPI and increases, if we don't fund these dollars, we are shortchanging our students. We are putting more pressure on our teachers, and we are not living up to the Kansas Constitution. So again, this is not discretionary funding. We are required by law to do this, and I will be supporting it.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could we also get a breakdown to better understand this, the increases in at-risk funding that will be happening according to the current proposed budget and what's happened over the last couple of years? Would that be something we could quickly grab?
We will see if Jennifer can grab that for us quickly. In the meantime, we can continue and see if she can get that for us. Other comments or questions? Senator Gossage.
My concern is, if you're sitting in the federal government and you're saying, what if we do nothing? It's a mandate where they said that they intended to pay up to 40%. They're at 14% historically. And I'm just concerned that we might see less there instead of more. And I just wanted to have a heavier focus on whether that's a bill we write, whether that's something that we encourage our educators, our schools, our parents to reach out to the federal government on this. They uphold their portion of it rather than it come from the Kansas taxpayers. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? While we see if Jennifer gets that, I'd just like to maybe shed some differing views on this, because I don't think there's any disagreement that we want all of our kids, and especially our most vulnerable kids, to have what they need to be successful. That is not the issue as I see it before us. But there are some things I think that bear in mind. First of all, according to Gannon, we are fully funding special education. Now, we do have a statute that says 92% of excess costs. So we need to make sure we keep those two very separate. Also, local districts have the authority to get local option budget money attributable from special education students. Up until last year, they were not required to transfer that money from special education, from those students, to the special education fund. Some districts did, some districts didn't. It could go into their general fund or wherever. So when we hear this, well, we have to transfer from general fund, up until last year when the legislature said you have to transfer your special education LOB into your special education fund, districts did not have to do that. So this is why I caution us making a decision on adding more funding right now. One, it's going to increase our maintenance of effort, which never goes away. We're on the hook for that. But why don't we see, because this is the first year that districts have had to transfer their local option budget for SPED into those accounts. But I have the runs for 2024. if special education state aid included the amount that is now required to be transferred from the LOB to the special education fund, there would have been $699.1 million in special education state aid, which would have been 91.7% of excess cost for 2025. If the special education state aid included the amount that is required to be transferred from the LOB to the special education fund, there would have been $819.5 million in the special education state aid, which would be 102.8% of excess costs. So I think we need to see the impact of requiring them to take money they are getting at the local level for special ed and actually using it for those kiddos before we go ahead and increase our maintenance of effort and put money in. Let's see what that does to the funding of special education students. And we can reassess. And if it's not doing what we need it to do, then we will take care of those vulnerable students. Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important to remember, and going back to history, and we have a lot of new members on here, when the Gannon decision was made, we were fulfilling our 92%, which is why it was not part of Gannon. And the districts do have to provide that 8%, and they're already transferring more than that 8%. But I do think it's important to talk about why it was not part of Gannon, because we were delivering our state obligation at that point. Thank you.
Committee, I'm pulling up some other information. Other questions or concerns? Jennifer, do you have information for us from Senator Shane's request?
I do, Madam Chair. If we look at the at-risk and the high-density at-risk weighted FTE, which has not been audited yet for fiscal years 24-25, we're looking at that there is 109,934 weighted FTEs in 24-25 for that. In fiscal year 24, the final numbers were 110,710 for both for those two combined. Based on the fact that base was $588 last year, that would make the dollar amounts for those weightings just over $563 million. This year, with the base being 5,378, that puts us at just over $591,000. So about or $531 million. Get the right number in there. So we're looking at close to a $30 million difference between the two, but that is because the base increased between the 2 years due to the CPIU increase. So.
Okay, did that answer your question? Just a couple of other things, and whatever the will of the committee is for the recommendation, but I do want to just help everyone understand all of the complexities of this issue. This is from our revisers. The court in Gannon did not specifically examine special education funding on its own, but rather acknowledged special education funding as part of the total funding for the school finance system. In 2019, the court found the entire school finance system to be substantially compliant with the Constitution and ended its jurisdiction in 2024 upon full implementation of the phased-in funding. So that is from our revisers. The other thing I'd like for consideration is I do have the new unencumbered fund balances that I think is something we need to consider too. For all funds unencumbered, in 2020, it was $4.6 billion unencumbered funds. It's grown steadily every year. So for 2024 to 2025, all funds is $5.9 billion in unencumbered funds. Special ed only, not including co-ops. In 2020, unencumbered funds, $201 million. steadily increased. There was a little dip in one year, but it's now increased to 241 million in unencumbered special education funds. We want our students taken care of. My point is there are funds available. And we are requiring the transfer from LOB special education funds into special education now, which we weren't before. I would like for us to see the impact of that before we increase our maintenance of effort. So those are my comments. Any other comments or questions? We've got a motion and a second. Senator Argabright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, at-risk and special ed are two different categories of kids, and that's why there's funding strands to them. And so talking about them in the same arena, I don't think is correct, or we wouldn't have two strands of funding for that reason. Supplemental general fund, maybe that changed since I left, but I can tell you from my experience of several years, we didn't have trouble hitting that number. We always went over in special ed because that's a tough place to actually to budget for, because you don't know what you're going to deal with until the school year starts, and sometimes it changes during the school year. And there's children that cost into the 6-digit numbers. And so I just, it's hard to understand. It's hard to plan for if you're on the other side of this, but you do want to take care of kids. I do support the motion.
Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my point in bringing up the at-risk funding is, and I'm happy to be corrected if this is incorrect, but my understanding is that not all at-risk kids are special education students, but all special education students are at risk. And so there are services and efforts that are provided and can be supplemented through at-risk funding that do impact our special education population. And so to me, I guess it's just part of the entire package as we consider of what additional support is being provided to districts. And we know that the way that we view at-risk has changed over time, and that body of students has also grown over time, and that also kind of correlates with the increases in funding there. So I brought that up because there has been increases in services and capacity to help satisfy, I think, where there is some crossover potentially in our districts. And so that's the reason why I brought that up. And I do think it's important. I agree with the chair that it is important that we have an intentional tracing and following kind of the money where it goes. I know that without that, it is very difficult to get an estimate of what monies are specifically spent on special education support and instruction. And the same is true, we know this with at-risk. We know that the actual intentional spend and investment in at-risk instruction, there's much to be desired out of our schools. So I agree to proceed with caution, to accept the proposed number and not go beyond that, and let's allow the information to be revealed as far as the funds that do end up getting transferred into special education funds and tracking that intentional expenditure for special education. That'll give us a much clearer picture as we move into the future.
Committee, any other? Senator Argabright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Special ed is actually the last audit that school districts get, and as strange as it sounds, it doesn't happen till almost June. And so those are based on actuals. I think that's important to know, and that's why it comes out late in the year. So I think that's important, a piece to know.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Senator Gossage.
I think what's hard for the public and others to understand that haven't worked with the budget is that it's sort of apples and oranges. So when you're talking about at-risk funding, or we're talking about special or general ed funding, it's per child. They may have a certain weight, et cetera, but it's the number of children, and they're given a certain FTE, et cetera. But when it comes to special ed, it's based on the number of teachers that you have, the staff, and that can be difficult for people to understand. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anything else? Senator Petty.
I just want to throw out one thing because local option budget was brought up, and when we talk about local option budget, we are talking about property taxes. So you may think about that's okay, but that is shifting the burden instead of being a state responsibility to being a local responsibility, which can be very detrimental in school districts or in our communities across the state. So we in Kansas have had a system where with the 20 mills, we've looked at providing an equitable way of providing funding across the state and not overly burdening any one community. And this conversation, which I think is a good one, but maybe should be more in depth than when we're just trying to put our numbers together for the budget here. If you talk about local option budget, you are shifting where that money is coming from.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a recommendation and a second. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed, no? No. Motion fails. Division has been called. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay. It looks 5-5. The chair breaks the tie by voting no. So recommendation fails. Any other recommendations? Remember, this will be reported out in Ways and Means on Tuesday. These are the committee recommendations. And then, of course, there's the decision from Ways and Means. Yes, Jennifer.
I just need a clarifying, back to the original, the first motion. Children's Cabinet was not touched at all. It is still just as it is in the budget. You were just talking about KSDE, not Children's Cabinet, or are you including removing Children's Cabinet's funding?
I am talking for KSDE's budget, just Gannon.
Okay, so Children's Cabinet remained as it was, untouched by that motion.
I'll have to clarify with you offline. I just need to understand all of the implications of that, but yes, Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, with that and not sure, can we hold this over till tomorrow? Because I do have a motion. And since we're not exactly sure where we are on the education budget, can we hold this over for tomorrow?
Without objection, we can hold this over until tomorrow. Any objection? We do have master teachers. I do know if we can make it somewhat quick, they're going to be tardy getting in here. So if we can start right on time and take care of our budget business before they get in, that would be optimal. Okay. Yep. Thank you. We are adjourned.